Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so for decades, anyone studying the Greek New Testament has been handed the exact same tools, parsing charts and lexical aids. But what if that purely mechanical approach is actually causing us to miss the very heart of the author's message? It's literally giving us only half the story. Today, we're diving into a groundbreaking framework that shifts our focus away from just translating words and instead helps us decode the profound hidden choices behind them.
Think about that for a second. It's a pretty provocative thought, right? To really understand the Greek New Testament, we essentially need to treat the text like a detective's crime scene and ask ourselves why specific words were chosen over others. You see, it isn't enough to simply label a verb. We have to realize that every single word on the page represents a choice. It's a deliberate selection made from a massive pool of alternatives that the author ultimately left right there on the cutting room floor.
We have a fascinating journey ahead today. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll move beyond mechanical word parsing. Second, we'll explore the two axes of language. Third, we'll see exactly why meaning is contrastive. Fourth, we're going to decode the gospel narratives. And finally, we'll wrap up with the preacher's practical payoff. Basically, we are moving from basic 1D grammar rules to the cinematic dimensions of language that will completely change how you read, teach, and preach.
Let's jump into part 1. Beyond mechanical word parsing, looking at grammar as a system of choices. Traditional parsing is kind of like an archaeological sieve, you know? It tells us what a word is, filtering it through its basic morphological building blocks, but it stalls right there. It never actually ascends to the level of meaning. A parsing label tells us that an author used a particular structure, sure, but it leaves the absolute most crucial question totally unanswered. Why this structure and not another?
Which brings us to part 2, the two axes of language, moving from 1D rules to 2D depth. To find that deeper meaning, we need to turn to a framework called systemic functional linguistics. This shows us that language is not just some neutral coding system, it actually operates simultaneously on two distinct axes. The author isn't just following grammar rules on autopilot, they're actively enacting meaning through a highly organized system of choices.
Now, this contrast is absolutely crucial. Every single sentence operates on two distinct axes at the exact same time. First up, you have the syntagmatic axis. This is the horizontal chain of words as they actually appear in front of you. It governs the structural rules, basically what is legally allowed to sit next to what. But the second axis is the paradigmatic axis, and this operates vertically. It holds the hidden pool of alternatives, the words, the tenses, the voices the author could have legally chosen for that exact spot but didn't. So, while the horizontal axis tells us what's legal, the vertical axis holds the hidden choices that reveal true intent. Okay, think of it like a restaurant menu. The sequence of your meal is fixed horizontally, right? Step 1 is the appetizer, step 2 is the main course, and step 3 is dessert. That sequence is syntagmatic. But within step 2, the main course, you have a vertical paradigm of options: beef, chicken, or fish. Your choice of fish actually means something precisely because you looked at the beef and the chicken and said, no thanks. The meaning lives in the choice against the alternatives.
Let's unpack that a bit more in section 3, why meaning is contrastive. This is the foundational principle of discourse. So the big takeaway here is that a linguistic choice only carries weight based on the alternatives that were rejected. If a language literally forces an author to use a certain form, well, that doesn't tell us much. But when an author has multiple legal options and deliberately selects just one, suddenly every feature of that selected word becomes loaded with communicative value. Meaning is always contrastive.
And this idea absolutely shines when we look at Constantine R. Campbell's verbal aspect model. He uses these brilliant spatial metaphors, turning abstract verb tenses into cinematic camera moves. Instead of just thinking about time, think about the author's viewpoint. The aorist tense is a helicopter view. You're looking at an action as a bounded whole from the outside. The present and imperfect tenses give us a street view. We are inside the action as it unfolds. The perfect tense means we have zoomed in for heightened proximity, and the pluperfect provides heightened remoteness, giving us the background to the background. Let's zoom in on that perfect tense, pun totally intended. Under this model, we actually have to toss out the traditional temporal definition you probably learned in school. You know, the one defining it as a past action with present results. That framework just creates way too many exceptions in the text. Instead, think of it as a spatial choice. When an author uses the perfect tense, they are actively choosing to step closer to the parade and zoom the camera right in on an intensified present condition.
All right, part 4, decoding the gospel narratives, focusing on the grammar of revelation in John. This is where the theory turns into some seriously incredible practical insight. John's gospel is just the perfect laboratory to observe these paradigmatic choices in action. Listen to this. Across John's 7 sign narratives, there are exactly 23 instances of the historical present quotative frame, basically words like he says interrupting the past tense story. And guys, that mathematical clustering? No way is that an accident. John isn't just sprinkling these in randomly. He's clustering them with clear purpose, right around the moments of Jesus' most direct self-revelation. Notice how John structures these stories. In John 2 at Cana and John 4 with the royal official, he uses the aorist tense to handle the mundane, everyday structural traffic of the plot, the scene setting, the approach, the wrap-up of the miracle. But then, he deliberately shifts to the historical present to throw a blazing spotlight on Jesus' revelatory commands. In John 4, when Jesus says, "Go, your son will live," John shifts to the present tense to pull the reader into internal proximity with that command at the exact moment it sparks life across a 20-mile distance. The aorist was completely available, but John chose the present. That, my friends, is the grammar of revelation. We get the exact same cinematic direction in John chapter 9. The author uses the imperfect tense to background the murmuring crowd, making their debate about the healed blind man feel like mere background noise compared to the man's own bold declarations. On the flip side, in John 11, Jesus uses the perfect tense to say Lazarus has fallen asleep. He isn't just recalling some past event, he is zooming us right into the immediate, intensified condition of the tomb in that very moment. And hey, this whole framework extends way beyond just verbs. The author is constantly making choices about participant labeling and grammatical voice to establish theological identities. Like in John 4, where the royal official shifts from calling Jesus a formal title to addressing him personally as Lord, or in John 2, where Jesus famously addresses Mary as woman. The vertical paradigm of choices definitely included the word mother, but Jesus rejected it to intentionally shift the relational frame in that moment. And in John 9, the passive voice is chosen specifically to background human actors so that the unseen divine force, God's work, can be highlighted. Bringing it home with section 5, the preacher's practical payoff. Preaching with the text, not just about it. For anyone teaching or preaching these texts, grasping these deliberate vertical choices pays a massive homiletical dividend. When you find these highly marked, totally unexpected choices, you have quite literally found the natural, God-given emphasis of the discourse. Analyzing that paradigmatic axis is like an insurance policy against embarrassing exegetical errors. For one, it stops totality transfer dead in its tracks. That's when someone tries to load a single word with every possible dictionary meaning it ever had. It also prevents the root meaning fallacy, making sure we don't preach a word's ancient etymological history, like what a word meant way back in Homer's Odyssey. Instead, we preach the specific, contrastive emphasis the author chose for that exact relational context. Ultimately, exegesis, properly understood, is the discipline of recovering those choices and asking what they reveal about the author's communicative intent. When we learn to read that vertical axis of rejected alternatives right alongside the horizontal text, the grammar actually does the hermeneutical work for us. We aren't imposing our own subjective outline onto the text. We're tracing the contours of the author's own communicative strategy. We are discovering exactly what they wanted to highlight simply by observing what they chose not to say. So, I'll leave you with this. How will recovering the choices not made change the way you read your next text? The next time you open up a passage, I want you to look really closely and ask yourself, what did the author choose not to say, and how does that silence change everything? By seeing that hidden pool of rejected alternatives, you aren't just reading words on a page anymore. You are stepping directly into the mind of the author. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Now, what hidden choices will you discover next?